And finally, the constructivist camp. And their question, of course, is gender a biological or a construction? And I think, again, in today's world, this is a very relevant question to ask. How do we image ourselves, right? And then from that imaging, do we create our reality? You may remember Linda Bengley's. We saw some of her poor pieces in the minimalism discussion. But I wanted to show you some of the ads she did for her shows. And they were very striking, I think, for the time, and even are very striking now, where she often, for her show materials, her invitations, she would try to be very edgy to get people's eyes on them. And I think in these two images, she's playing with how women construct their image. She says, is it really who you are, how you appear, or is it putting on a show? So she's like, I'm two different women here. One woman is very aggressive, very edgy. These are the dildo. This idea of, sort of uh, going, sort of over a line into something else, creating herself into something masculine. And then in the very other image saying, I'm just, a femme fatale. I'm just the nude, right? Asking for your eyes on me. She really makes us have to stop and think about, like, what do we see when people present themselves to us? And is that truth or fiction? And again, is gender something you can consider through that lens as well? Is it just an unwrapping, right, of presentation? This is Cindy Sherman, and she plays a lot with constructing images. She is a photographer, and when she started out, she did a series she called the Untitled Film Stills. Why a film still? Back when movies were not digital yet, were done on real film stock. What they would do for the magazines ads, or for the posters, is they'd find one particular film still and present that. It was meant to evoke an emotion or a sort of feeling about the movie, let's say. So she said, I wanted to do like a photograph series where all of these women were stuck in this moment in time, in a sense, and then that one image of them is supposed to evoke in you a range of reactions or emotions, or like, who is this person? What is the mystery here that I need to figure out? So she said, I wanted to consider that. She is always the model, so she's always photographing herself in various wigs and costumes. And, she said that's another important thing to consider is I'm always the platform that I'm, putting this imagery upon. I'm always the one performing in a sense. I'm always me, right? But again, I'm transforming myself into all these different women's, and making you wonder, well, which one is really Cindy Sherman? And she's like, well, none of them are. So she makes you think about this idea of your presentation as something that's very important. Is the person what you see, right? Just because they wear a suit, does that mean they're got their shit together? Just because they're wearing pajamas, does that mean they don't? She's like, but our clothes, our demeanor, our posture, like a lot of this communicates things to other people. She's like, but a lot of it is just putting on or taking off. And she said I was very interested in that. She also, by the way, for a long, long time, never appeared as what she called herself in person. When she would go out, she said, I always wore costumes. I didn't want anyone to know who the real Cindy Sherman was. I always wanted to be throwing them from a new loop. So she kind of lived this mentality of like, we don't really have an identity, if we don't want to, right? These works, I would say, to me, she's thinking about like motherhood, stardom. One is sort of the upright mother, maybe one is the Hollywood starlet, just getting up in the middle of the day. Young ingenues, right, coming to the city. Um, these women who are kind of, her, but always coming through a different lens of perception and reality. This is Muriel Ukeles, and her piece she did at the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum in Connecticut, which she called Maintenance Project. And for this project, she basically told the museum, all I'm going to do while I'm there is clean. I'm gonna wash the steps and clean the podiums and, Windex the mirrors. And she said, I wanted to give visibility to women's work. She said, work that's usually invisible or happening behind the scenes, something that you don't really give anyone credit for, but it needs to happen. It needs to go on. So she said, all I did in this project was clean. And this is something that you start to see women artists doing in the 70s. they start to consider the various roles that women play and how can you make those roles visible to other people. How can you make the invisible labor visible? This is Mary Kelly's postpartum project. And for this project, she basically documented her child. She said there was a very clear message to women artists of this time that having a child's going to slow down your career, having a child's going to get in the way. And I would say for women, especially in America, that's still very much the truth. We don't have a very robust system of leave for mothers or fathers. We don't have sort of this support structure in place for people to have children and also be a vibrant working adult. I don't think so. She said, I wanted to say to people that just because I have a child now doesn't mean I'm not a vibrant working artist. So she documented everything that the kid did. She documented like how many teeth they had, what kind of formula they were drinking. This is the kid's poop, and she would write an analysis of everything that the kid had eaten, right, for this bowel movement. And I think a lot of her work looks rather actually conceptual, the way it's presented, almost like the poop stain and then the list of things. It looks almost Hans Hakke-y, in its kind of presentation. But notice that, again, she's really thinking about what roles do women play. This is Jean Dunning, and I ran into her work in the 90s when I was doing my graduate work, and I really identified a lot with her pieces. She deals with like, body dysmorphia, eating disorders, right? Things that make women not see their bodies in a true way. I'm someone who's struggled with my weight my whole life. I had anorexia when I was younger, and so when I saw her works, I thought about what women perceive their bodies to be like, and then what other people see. So she did a project she called the Blob, where she attached this kind of sack with this jelly and jelly kind of like substance in it, and she just wore it around, slept with it, and she said, a lot of women see their body this way as something grotesque and that works against them, and the bloating and the, all the physical things that go in and go alongside of being someone who menstruates. She's like, are we seeing our body the right way? She did a video called "Getting Dressed," where she basically has this woman struggling to dress the blob, and I always aligned this video with like that day you go in your closet and you put on your favorite dress and you're like, why is this thing not fitting right? And you just throw it on the floor and you're like, oh Jesus, how again a woman's body often fluctuates with her hormones, in ways that are unpredictable, and we usually blame ourselves for these things, like, well, I shouldn't have had that cupcake or whatever. And she's like, no, women often see their bodies incorrectly, right? We see our bodies as enemies. We don't see them as they truly are. Where you might be like, oh, I'm so fat, and someone else is like, no, you're not, like you're not at all. So she, to me, is a very interesting artist because of her work with body dysmorphia. And here is one of her self portraits where she put like this idea of her with a mustache, and again, to me, it's a little bit of a Marcel Duchamp shout out that she's doing there. This is Sarah Lucas. She in the 80s started to do these works where she would kind of create these very aggressive self portraits where she would substitute parts of her body with food, and again try to create this sense of discomfort, right? With the woman's body and a woman's sort of biology in a sense. But again, this is a very sort of more postmodern way of trying to deal with the issue. These are some of her works called Ace in the Hole, from her show Ace in the Hole. And I'm always fascinated with these because they're grotesque yet not. And the idea of the hose, and the idea of beauty and sexiness. I think she's playing a lot with those values. This is Zoe Leonard, and I'm showing you her installation at Documenta. I've talked about the Venice Biennale a couple times. I also want to point out that Documenta is one of the most important shows out there. It happens in Germany. It's a very important show for contemporary artists. So if you're interested in like looking at who's hot right now, you should always look at the Venice Biennale and Documenta because it's usually the hot artists that are invited to those shows. In this show, she basically decided to use these portraits of women juxtaposed with imagery of vaginas, very clinical imagery of vaginas. And she said, I wanted to position the portraits in a way where, in a sense, they were almost like looking at or interacting with the vaginas. And she said, I've always been fascinated with how women are presented sort of in this classy or sexy, kind of way in art, but never very clinically. We never get down to sort of the clinical idea of like what is womanhood. She's like, Courbet's Origin of the World is really the only thing that's ever been like, let's be realistic about sex, about desire and what it all leads to. So she said I also wanted sort of a very traditional look to the show, with these sort of damask walls and the framed portraits. But she said I wanted it to be a little cheeky, a little kind of funny too, where you're like you want to chuckle a little bit because you have these well-bred women in these portraits staring at vaginas, and it's kind of funny a little bit. This is Barbara Kruger. And if you've ever really paid attention to what my avatar is on Canvas, you may notice that it is this. And the reason I use it is because I don't personally love using images of myself. I just never have, don't really want to do it. Um, and so I uploaded this as my avatar. And it's kind of a twofold thing. If people don't have a lot of awareness of the image, they just think I'm representing myself as a Greek sculpture. And if they do know what it's from, right, then they realize that I'm saying your gaze hits the side of my face. That I have a very healthy understanding of how I'm up in front of people every day, presenting myself to them, and they are analyzing me, looking at what I'm wearing, trying to understand the perception of who I am. So gazes are always hitting the sides of my face, right? All day long, all the time. But what she does with her artwork is she takes imagery, and then puts wording over top in this very graphical kind of way. And it's usually dealing with sort of this sense that women have been presented as a commodity to be viewed and consumed, and that often they're not trusted to, have regency over their own bodies, right? That they are thought to not understand what they need. And so she's like, I like using these little pithy little statements, with this kind of imagery. Nature and nurture on the left, right? We won't play nature to your culture. And then we've received orders not to move. It sort of plays with the idea of how you pin garments as you're creating, pin textiles as you're creating garments, right? If you're sewing something together. So, it kind of plays along with this idea of, how what are women supposed to be doing, right? And I love the one on the right, it's one she did much more recently, where she said gender is irrelevant. Because again, the different waves of feminism have embraced this. Feminism started out with biology, then it moved to like women having the ability to construct their own imagery, and then today, again, I think it's really moving into the idea of where does feminism fit in a transgender world, right? Um, I love the one on the left. It's time for women to stop being politely angry. I lead the union of the faculty at TCC, and I will tell you that I'm always treated very differently than my male counterparts. Somehow I'm not supposed to be angry as a woman. I'm not supposed to be aggressive as a woman. And if you know me, I'm all those things because I'm just I know what I want. I'm gonna get it. But I always look at this image. Who does she think she is? And I've been asked that more times than I know in my life. I'd be rich if I could have some money for that. And then this idea that as a woman, if you want to protest something, you're supposed to do it politely without upsetting anybody. You shouldn't be vulgar or curse or things like this. And like who made up these rules, right, at the end of the day. She's done a lot of work recently for the National Eating Disorders Council, because if you look at the rise of eating disorders in America, especially, it's shocking the numbers. I was in the 90s when I had my eating disorder, and it shocks me how it's just grown, right, over the years. Some of the statistics you see here, that eating disorders have grown 400%, right, since 1970. It's like, oh my god, 80% of 9-year-olds are on a diet. It's like, what? I don't even know what a diet is. But again, that what it was for me to be 9 and what it is for a 9-year-old today are very different things. The kind of imagery that assaults them at all times, right, is it's a different world, right, for women today. I love I shop, therefore I am. Consumerism, right? And the final group I want to show you in our discussion is the Gorilla Girls. Notice that gorilla is spelled like guerrilla warfare, not like the animal. But they wear these gorilla masks. And as a group in the 80s, it was a bunch of women artists who decided that they wanted to take guerrilla action against the art establishment in New York. and they'd come to shows and they would hand out different leaflets and different flyers. These are some from 1985. And the leaflets and the flyers were meant to make people consider the amount of sexism that occurs not just in the art world but in general. So if you look at the one on the bottom right, for instance, women in America earn only two-thirds of what men do, and this is a true statistical fact. And women artists earn only one-third of what men do. So they're trying to talk about artist issues, right? How many women had one-person exhibits at New York museums? One in one museum. But they also are pointing to larger issues as well. And then as they moved on in their career, they went into thinking about like what are minority rights? You know, what are rights related to transgenderism and such. So they've kind of gone more so into not just feminist issues, but just social justice issues in general, we might say. They're very cheeky, very funny. They try to not take themselves too seriously, um, and use a little humor, right, in the things that they present. But I think, again, they're using kind of this idea of guerrilla action to make people wake up and kind of consider why women don't get paid as much as men. Why are women not in as many galleries as men? You can go back and think about like Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, where a Jackson Pollock painting at auction would probably go from anywhere between like 50 million to like $300 million. And a Lee Krasner, she might be lucky if she hit 1 million at auction. And it's like they had similar painting styles. They were in the same group. Why is there such a disparity between, oh, this is a Jackson Pollock and that's a Lee Krasner? And as I mentioned, Lee Krasner really kind of held up his career in a lot of ways. So, again, they're making you kind of have to think about these issues of disparity, fairness, and is there a way to fix that?